First time it seemed like wow.
Sometimes it just sets the mood, you
It
know.
does, man. It sets the mood right on the back.
What's that?
My headband.
It's too good. It's a
Welcome to your worldwide live. We are literally streaming to the world through YouTube. And the young man, Sawyer Sabo, has entered the room out of nowhere. And you're saying you want to take that test right now? You come in right when I'm about to. I just went live on YouTube. So
Take your time.
I
You have to think about it.
I try to get on the Jumbotron all night so I can do the data.
That would have been worse too, but what I said.
I would have created.
You're like, I'm from
it.
Portland.
You would have written.
Wait, did you? What's that now? Where's the announcer? That's what I heard.
Probably not actually.
Somebody's got to on it.
He was like,
It takes no pride to job.
all right, moving on. Al Capone. You got that right? We did. That's where we left off. We didn't watch about Al Capone, the most infamous mobster of all time. Kind of like where the whole idea of gangster or mobster mentality came into the United States in the 1920s with the Prohibition. So, by the way, we talked about this kind of before. So how many think Prohibition should have never happened? Only one person in here thinks Prohibition should have never happened. Based on what we've studied, I'll ask again, you have to participate. There are no abstentions. It's a yes or a no. Yes, Prohibition should have happened. Any votes? 1, 2, 3. Prohibition should have never happened. I said you're not allowed to abstain.
I have to think about it. It's yes or no. Yeah, it's complicated.
Made it, but it just caused a lot more, like, illegal stuff to happen.
So you like the intentions that there were a lot of people in America, especially Christians, and I think I might have mentioned, it's not in your notes maybe, but there was a group called the Women's Temperance Movement. There was a group of Christian women that looked at the society and they looked at the disintegration of the family. I don't think is it in our notes? Is it this class or civics? Where the divorce rate increased by 2,000 from 1870s, right? And they're looking at what's going on with our families. And one common thing they found in families was this increase in alcohol consumption. And what that leads to, it leads to slothfulness, it leads to abuse, it leads to not just abuse of alcohol, abuse of people, all of these negative things that were happening in society. And they said, it seems like a common theme here is the rampant use of alcohol. Maybe if we got rid of so much alcohol being accepted and abused in our society, then our families would not continue to be deteriorate like at the rate that they were. Because the backbone of any civilization, they were probably educated because they know that when the family gets destroyed, overall in a society, in a civilization, history shows us that civilization, the wisdom of God himself, the institution of family, and the marriage of a man and a woman and procreating and having that institution is so important, not just to might cure it. We find out that it really didn't, right? It probably led to, notice I use the word caused, probably led to, if you look at it objectively, more crime, actually an explosion of this kind of crime, mobster crime, right? Because it led to a competition of getting something that people were going to do anyway. Some of you were going to say, hey, they're going to do it anyway. So why pass a law against something that people are just going to do anyway? To that, I would say, those of you that are fellow Christians like me and fellow believers in life being a gift from God like me, to that, I would say, well, then you're not pro-life. You think abortion should be legal because people are going to do it anyway. So should that be legal too? I mean, a few people did raise their hands and say, hey, I think prohibition was a good thing. And is Al Capone, put it this way, are you going so far to say, I don't think you are, that Al Capone is the follower of the women's temperance movement? Because there would be people that would make that argument. that, hey, we wouldn't have had all of this. Al Capone wouldn't have been this notorious. All these people wouldn't have been killed if it wasn't for those nibby women, Christian temperance people outlawing alcohol. Because, and another part of it is, in America, land of the free, liberty, individual freedom and liberty. Hey, government telling me what I can and can't put in my body. Oh wait, I already touched on that 100 years later. The idea that prohibition was wrong in a lot of people's eyes because the government was mandating, dictating what someone could consume. Matter of fact, what was part of the law? The law was not that you couldn't consume it, right? Remember the law was you can't distribute it, you can't manufacture, distribute, or sell alcohol because of that intrinsic value that we put on individual liberty. So, my body, my choice. You guys get so silent. I can't read your faces. Like you didn't understand what I'm saying in the world you're growing up in. Prohibiting or mandating what someone can or doesn't put in their body. Strange days indeed. Having said that, people like Al Capone usually are very interesting too.
Al Capone is one of the most notorious criminals in U.S. history. What did Capone do to become so infamous? What happened to it? In the 1920s, the passage of the 18th Amendment gave these crime syndicates were responsible for bringing in much of the illegal liquor that was pouring into the country. This importation of alcohol made many of these criminals millionaires. The most notable of these gangsters was Al Capone. Al Capone was born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn. He was a talented student, but had great difficulty following the rules. He was expelled from school at the age of 14 after hitting a teacher in the face.
Some of you are out there like, he's my hero. Not you, Serenity.
Leaving school, he had a number of odd jobs, including working at a bowling alley, a candy store, working as a bouncer at a ball.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to stop it every 10 seconds. But does anybody know what one of the main jobs of a kid that would be like 14 or 15 working at a bowling alley would be in 1920s? Or before actually, anytime before like the 60s, really. Yeah.
A pin chaser?
A pin setter. You know how you go bowling right now and the machine puts the pins down? Did you know up until about the time I was born that most bowling alleys in the country, there were people that their job was after the ball was done, they were pin setters. I knew a guy that was the pin setter at, you guys know where Washingtonville is? Have you ever heard of that little town between Columbia and Salem? You go on Route 14. If you don't know what it was called, Washingtonville. If you ever go from Columbiana here to Salem on the main route, it's where you have to stop at that one red light in that little town. There's a post office on the left. There's not much there. That's Washingtonville. Anyway, they used to have a bowling alley there, and the guy that I knew friends with was a pin setter in the 60s.
Bar and serving as a small-time boxing promoter. As Capone entered his early 20s, he moved to Chicago and became involved in the world of organized crime. He worked with John Torrio's gang, which was the biggest and most well-organized crime syndicate in Chicago. In no time at all, Capone became one of the top men in Torrio's gang. In 1925, Torrio was shot several times and retired, leaving Al Capone in charge. At the age of 26, Capone found himself as the head of one of the companies. Capone continued to expand this enterprise. Capone spent millions of dollars bribing public officials. Judges, juries, police officers, and politicians were all paid off in order to ensure that Chicago's law enforcement officials would look the other way. was also being used to further their law-breaking ways. Buildings were bombed, and members of rival gangs were beaten or even murdered. For example, on February 14, 1929, Capone's men disguised themselves as police officers. They entered the headquarters of a rival gang and used machine guns and shotguns to execute 7 men. This incident became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. News and pictures of the incident appeared in newspapers. The public was appalled. To crack down on Al Capone's illegal dealings, the Department of Treasury appointed a special task force to bring down Capone's operation.
Lots of movies about this.
Elliot Ness was chosen to lead this team of law enforcement agents, which became known as the Untouchables. They were known by this name because it was said they could not be bribed or otherwise manipulated. The Untouchables began raids on the illegal stills and breweries and had a major impact on Capone's business.
By the way, side little sermonette note. We all Christians, right? We like to believe that we could never be corrupted, right? We lose sight of only by the grace of God go I, that I would never do that or I would never do that. But notice that they're highlighting a group of men that were in law enforcement known as the Untouchables. Why? Because there was such a small group of men that actually couldn't be bribed. Kind of sad, right? So you had people that, many of them were probably Christians first and foremost. Secondly, they had sworn an oath to be police officers, yet how easy was it for Al Capone and those kind of people to bribe them to look the other way? Integrity is everything, supposed to be, right? And we'd like to think that we could never be, but think about it, that these men became known as the Untouchables because, hey, there's finally a group of men, no matter what Al Capone says, they could be like just regular working men, they're just hoping to get kids presents for Christmas, and Al Capone comes along and says, hey, for 10,000, just look the other way, and they would say no. Would you say no? Would I say no? Would I say no if someone approached me and asked me to do something illegally on the salary that I make, and someone said, well, there's 100,000 in it for you? I'm standing before you telling you I would say no.
Amen.
I sure hope so. Right? How easy it is to fall prey to. That you would have a group known as the Untouchables. Because, hey, there's actually people that won't fall for the bribes. Jamin and I, we would not.
Ness estimated that they seized more than $1 million worth of breweries. This would be more than $13 million today. Eventually, the work of Ness and his fellow agents and IRS investigator Frank Wilson led to the end of Capone's illegal ventures. Capone was charged with 22 counts of tax evasion, as well as over 5,000 violations of the Volstead Act. This was the law that had enforced the 18th Amendment. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison in 1932. He served out his sentence at both the Atlanta U.S. Penitentiary and the federal prison known as Alcatraz, which is just off the coast of San Francisco.
What's the name of that prison?
Can you just say it?
It's on the board.
No, I'm sorry, the nickname. Thought maybe you guys would know. The nickname of Alcatraz. It's called the that becomes super notorious in America for if you're sentenced to Alcatraz, and also becomes kind of a challenge that, you know, what happens with some people when they get sent to prison? They try to escape, right? So there's movies made about men that were the challenge of not just escaping from prison, but you can never escape from Iraq. I mean, it's there in San Francisco Bay, and if you got out of the prison somehow and were able to escape the rock, how are you going to survive the waters with no, you know, vehicle or anything to get back to the city? Yes,
We like saw that over the summer.
you were out there?
Yeah.
Cool.
After being released from prison, Capone lived out the remainder of his life in Florida. He died in January of 1947 after suffering from a stroke, cardiac arrest, and contracting COVID, all within a few weeks. Capone's capture and imprisonment, there was still much organized crime to be dealt with. J. Edgar Hoover, director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, appointed agents to track down and eliminate these other outlaws. These agents, known as G-men, short for government men, worked throughout the late 1920s and early 1930s to bring order to lawless cities such as Chicago and Kansas City. These were two cities that became well known for harboring gangsters. They even created a public enemies list, which stated the most wanted criminals in the nation. Al Capone was the nation's first public enemy number one.
And there you have it. Al Capone. Anybody got further thoughts? Yes.
So when they had those guys that were like shot in on the ground, and they said that they put that out for like the public to see, would they just like put that picture in the newspaper?
Right. Yeah. And what's weird is, so if you're living in the 20s, say in Chicago, right? You know about this Al Capone, right? You know that there's illegal activity going. You know there's speakeasies. But it's kind of like something you know, but maybe you didn't actually see. It's kind of like today with gangland violence. You know, you've heard of the term drive-bys. Everybody's heard of something like that. Like when you hear about the murder rate, well, in Chicago, I mean, in Chicago today, it's the most violent city in America 100 years later, because there's rival gangs for different, usually drugs. And so if you're living in Chicago, like I had a friend who lived in Chicago and visits there a lot because now he lives in Wisconsin, just not far away, but he loves Chicago. The violence doesn't really affect him. He knows it's there, but the people that are being killed are people involved in drugs. So it's kind of like, it's there, but it doesn't affect you. Like, oh, another drive-by. It might be on the news. Hey, someone else was killed, but you know that they're all just involved in drugs. So it's almost like you don't even give it much thought. Oh, more drug people doesn't affect my life. Well, when this happened, first of all, they set themselves up as police officers to get into this warehouse of their rival gang. And then, 7 people at one time, the way they did it, then it became news. Then all of a sudden people are like, whoa, what? Like waking out of a stupor or something. Like, you didn't know this was going on? For instance, let me give a comparison. Right now, today, most of you don't pay attention to the news and current events like I do. Every week almost, this is no joke, I hear about how many shootings there were in Chicago and how many killings there were in Chicago, right? It's almost like I hear it, it's like it doesn't even affect me. It's like, oh, how many got killed, how many shot today or this weekend in Chicago? Like the latest break over Thanksgiving break, 60 shot in Chicago on the weekend. Like, oh, just a routine weekend, right? And that's how most people are. Now, if something was to happen in Chicago, like where, for whatever reason, 20 children were in a place and were all killed. Now it would become big news. Now all of a sudden, everybody would be like, hey, we got to do something about this violence. You picking up what I'm saying? Like right now, it's happening all the time. It doesn't seem like anybody really cares. It's weird. It's how we are, right? Unless something really hits us hard and wakes us up, we kind of just like don't do anything. It's a weird phenomenon, psychological, sociological. But there's people out there constantly like reporting, hey, wake up, people. This is like an epidemic of violence, and especially this one city in America. And now it's throughout the country. They're just on the news yesterday, 12 cities had record murders in 2020. Doesn't affect me, so I don't really care anything about it. Good news is, if you pay attention, you may have heard that last year there was this big movement to quote unquote defund the police. Now you're starting to see all these people change their mind. Wait, what I meant was they're all changing their story now. Like, you know what? This whole idea of like getting rid of the police probably wasn't such a good idea. We probably need more police, because now it's starting to affect them. Like, oh yeah, BLM, defund the police. Oh, that's happening in my city now, because there's not enough police enforcement. So now they're changing their tune. I literally just saw, I forget her name, one of the leaders, I'm just getting ready in the morning. So I see one of the leaders of one of these cities, I can't remember her name or the city, but trust me, she's speaking and she's changing her tune, talking about how we've got to get, crack down on all this violence. Have people seen the smash and grab stories? You know what smash and grab is? You guys get it. Listen, ignorance is bliss. So I kind of don't want you to pay attention to the news, because I want you to just enjoy your life. But I kind of hope you pay attention a little bit to the news and try to figure out what truth and lies are. That's why I'm here. But anyway, there's something called smash and grab that's running rampant through the country. When I say this, you'll probably understand what I mean. You've never seen the videos of these gangs going into these stores. They smash through the doors and the windows, and there's like a dozen of them or so, and they just take all the loot they can get, and then they leave. Nobody's seen that? This is like all over the country now.
Doesn't it have to be under like 900 or something?
Well, so now a lot of places have laws that if it's not $1,000, if it's under 1,000 or 950 or whatever, that, well, they're not going to prosecute them for felonies, right? So, people with criminal minds, they pick up on all of that. So some of them care about that. So they're literally making sure they steal less than $1,000. Think about that. Like, we're going to go and that we know we're not going to get prosecuted because we didn't steal $1,000. Other people don't care about that at all, and they're just doing it and going into these stores, like a jewelry store. I forget the names. Newman's, not Newman's. Anyway, there's a very, this was in Hollywood or somewhere, San Francisco maybe, and I don't know the names of fancy stores. I've never even been at a Kohl's. So you think I'm joking? I've been to Target twice. There's one of these fancy jewelry stores, and there's video footage clear. They come in, they're smashing all the jewelry things, they're taking everything they can, and they leave. They're never going to get found or prosecuted. No one's even going to try. Other thing I saw this morning, in a neighborhood in San Francisco, somebody took a picture to avoid smash and grab. This is no joke. The people parked, I don't know if it's an apartment place, but you see the line of cars, right? Overnight, they all left their SUVs, all the backs are out. All the windows are down in their vehicles. Why? So that these people that are just going around smashing and grabbing will see that, hey, there's nothing in there to take. No reason to break my windows, people, okay? Everything's open. Look inside, nothing to take here, and go to the next vehicle so that their windows won't get smashed out. This is what, when people say things like, take our country back, make America great again, these are not just political things. This is like, where are we at as a country? Who owns the soul of America? Is the soul of America in the hands of Christian, God-fearing people that believe that America is a great place, or is it in the hands of those others? And we're seeing what happens when it's in their hands. Yeah.
Is the rule for like 1,000?
It's 900 something.
Is it so that people don't steal as much? Is that to stop it?
What's the rationale behind it? I'll give you another anecdotal story about something I know. My mother-in-law and my brother-in-law used to work. Is there still a place called Dillard's? Okay, so they worked at Dillard's in the mall. My brother-in-law worked in the men's department, right? This was almost 30 years ago. He was told by his manager, he went to his manager and said, he's seeing people just take like expensive coats and stuff. They just walk out the door. He was told not to do anything. You literally are not allowed to chase after them to try to stop them. Yes.
This is kind of random, but a few months ago, there was a drive-by shooting like right down the road, like right down my street.
Are you
Like,
in
and I
Youngstown?
heard it. It was like right down the corner.
You're in Youngstown?
Yeah.
Sad. Right, and that's not gonna, that doesn't make the news every day, right? That's just like another ho-hum day. City, America, yeah.
Why would, like, it be acceptable for that picture back then to be just like in a newspaper? Because it's pretty graphic. So I feel like I wouldn't see that now. So I'm just wondering.
Well, okay, I get it. I get what you're saying. Like, you would think back in the 20s when everything was like, they didn't want to show anything bad, right? Anything violent, or that they might not even put that in there, right? But I guess when that happened, it was such a shock, because it wasn't just a regular old mob killing, that maybe it was meant to shock people into reality of what was going on. And by 1929, when that happened, you already had, like in this classroom, you already had most of the people saying, okay, this prohibition idea probably wasn't a good idea, right? Even though it passed, you had most people within 10 years saying, this was not a good idea. So it's going to be shortly after that it gets reversed, because the 21st Amendment is going to repeal prohibition. So that's why it's not illegal today, unless, certain age requirements. But anyway, let's try to get something else done. Any other comments, questions? Here's an interesting story. In the 1920s, something else that was going on, and we touched on it when in your vocab list. By the way, check Google Classroom, because that thing is up there. It's like, Merry Christmas. Here's 20 points. All you got to do is do the quiz. There's no rules on whether you can use your notes or not. I mean, come on. At least you know what's not funny is that sometimes I do things like this and not everybody gets it 100%. I don't understand.
I was missed one. What was your signature time?
It's right there in the notes.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't realize we could use them.
No, I
Can we use
think
your
they
notes?
do. Yes. No, they do. Not just in this class, in other classes. What's that?
I didn't know.
Oh, really? Oh, you already took it on. You're a man. Anybody else even know what was up? All right. Interesting story. In the early 1900s, we had mentioned this with the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK, known for their hate and their violence towards blacks after the Civil War, we noted in the notes that they took up the mission of also going against Catholics and Jews and blacks and anyone else that didn't agree with their view of America. And sadly, we also touched on some of them used Christianity as their front. Like, hey, we're just trying to make America a more pure place. We just want to make sure Christian principles are being followed in America. And they would get people to join the KKK. The membership exploded because they didn't just promote themselves as, hey, come join our club. We go out and lynch black people and we burn down Catholic Church. No. They recruited people by setting themselves up as a group of people that looked at the American landscape, like what happened with Prohibition, and said, look what's going on in our country. We can stop all this stuff that's going on in our country, get back to biblical principles. So they kind of used that, but then they did all those other evil, hateful things. Well, one of the things they used was, you know what's causing all these problems in America? You'll understand this because you're living in these times 100 years later. These new immigrants. See, you're growing up in a time where there's a huge debate about immigration, right? These people were legal immigrants. They were coming to, what's that place called? New York Harbor? Ellis Island. They were being, we already showed you the video, how they get to Ellis Island, they get processed, they get interviewed, they get tested for disease. They get tested for disease. They get tested for disease and such when they come into America, because that was very important. You just don't. We're live to the world right now. So when immigrants come to America, America is a place of immigrants. America is built on immigration, people coming to America for the promise that it gives to all people in the world. So they legally come here to participate in this thing we call America and exceptionalism and American dream. And they would test them for disease, all kinds of diseases. And it wasn't even a pandemic. I mean, once we got past the Spanish flu. I just stopped myself from going on another rant. But the people like the KKK and other people were like, the problem that's going on is you got all these new immigrants. All these people coming from Southeastern Europe. These Italians. Before that was the Irish, by the way. I'm half Irish. And if I go back and look at the history of Irish American immigrants, not real pretty in a lot of cases. But anyway, I can't spend the whole class talking about immigration then and now. But 9 million people came to America mostly in just 10 years. That's a lot of people. When you consider the populations, that's like 10% of the population now is all of a sudden from one particular place. And they're saying that that's the problem with America, is that we're allowing all these foreigners in, even though they were coming legally, and America wanted more immigration. America's economy is booming. America needs more workers. This is something that countries do. They set immigration policy to